Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into the fascinating world of the artist Bob Camblin.
Yes, a really interesting figure.
Definitely. We've pulled together a pretty rich collection of sources, things like biographical accounts tracing his life, some really intriguing excerpts from Camblin's own writings and sketches.
Which give great insight.
Exactly. And also critical perspectives, from reviews of books featuring his art, plus personal reflections from people who knew him, collaborated with him.
So a real mix. It gives us a multifaceted view, which you definitely need for someone like Camblin.
Right. Our mission here is to really try and get under the skin of his artistic philosophy and explore what made him such a compelling but also kind of elusive figure in the art world.
Absolutely. We're not just looking at the art in isolation. We've got the context of his life, his own thoughts, how others saw him. It lets us build a much more, well, nuanced picture.
Couldn't agree more. So if you're someone who's ever been captivated by, say, the creative process itself, or maybe the relationship between art and philosophy,
Or just what it means to live a life really dedicated to artistic exploration.
then yeah, you're in the right place. This deep dive is for you. We're going to unpack some of his key ideas and trace the really captivating journey of his artistic evolution.
Sounds good. Where should we begin? His early life, maybe.
Perfect. Let's dive in there. His formative years, the influences that first started shaping him.
Okay, so Camblin. He was born in Oklahoma back in 1928. And interestingly, his family was very artistic. Both his parents were artists.
Ah, okay, so that early exposure must have been significant. Different mediums around him from the start.
You'd think so. And even in high school, he was involved art director for the yearbook, that kind of
And
thing.
this was in Ponca City, Oklahoma, right?
Huh.
In the 30s and 40s, which just sounds like quite a unique setting.
Yeah, you had things like the Marland Estate there, sort of a symbol of, oil boom extravagance.
And the Pioneer Woman statue, which is iconic. How might those local symbols have played into his work? It's interesting to think about.
Well, people have pointed to those recurring double V shapes in some later works. Maybe a nod to his mother, Viva Camblin, his own pioneer woman.
That's a fascinating interpretation. The personal weaving into the symbolic.
And it shows how even seemingly ordinary surroundings can leave a mark. Another big early influence, apparently, was the film The Wizard of Oz.
Really? The movie?
Yeah, it captured his imagination. He also had a close friendship early on with Forrest Harrisberger, another aspiring artist. They explored art together.
Those early creative friendships can be so crucial. Then, like many of his generation, military service came next.
That's right. And after that, the GI Bill was key. It allowed him to attend the Kansas City Art Institute. That seems like a major step in his formal training.
A real turning point, probably.
Seems like it. But his learning wasn't just formal. He was apparently a voracious reader.
Oh, yeah. What sort of things?
Ralph Waldo Emerson, the I Ching.
Yeah.
He was also really drawn to haiku and haiga.
Ah, the Japanese form.
Yeah.
Simple observations, image, and verse.
Exactly. That elegance and beauty in simplicity, you can definitely see echoes of that in his artistic style, that search for the profound in the everyday.
Finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. It's a theme that seems to run through his work.
It really does. So after the Art Institute, and there was a stint in the Air Force Reserve during the Korean War too, he won a Fulbright scholarship to Italy.
Wow, Italy. That sounds like it would have been transformative.
Hugely. It brought him face to face with masterpieces in the Uffizi Gallery, but also the really unusual Catacombe dei Cappuccini in Palermo.
The Copen catacombs.
Well,
With the mummified bodies.
the very same. That experience seems to have deeply affected his ideas about figurative forms, these abstract figures he sometimes called mummies.
A bit macabre, but artistically powerful, I imagine.
And he called Venice his personal Emerald City, which loops back to that Wizard of Oz fascination.
That's quite a connection. And you see direct Italian influences in the art itself, don't you? Like references to Botticelli.
Absolutely. There's a piece dedicated to KPFT radio that subtly nods to the birth of Venus. And his own work, Flora, clearly riffs on Botticelli's Primavera, but, well, with his own hidden imagery woven in.
So he's talking with art history, but always in his own voice.
Precisely. Always on his own terms. And he started getting recognition fairly early, exhibitions and so on. It set the stage for what came next.
Which was his teaching career initially. But that wasn't a straightforward path either, was it?
Not entirely. He actually worked as a map maker first, which is kind of interesting. That focus on visual organization.
Yeah, maps and art. There's a connection there. Then teaching.
Yeah, several places. Ringling, Illinois, Detroit, Utah, eventually landing at Rice University in Houston.
But the sources suggest he wasn't always thrilled with academia,
Hmm.
particularly Salt Lake City.
There are hints of, yeah, disillusionment. Maybe the academic art scene didn't quite align with where he was going artistically. Houston and Rice seemed to be a better fit, at least for a while. He got a good reception there.
But then came that really, well, radical move in 1976
Right, he just walks away from the stability of teaching.
to embrace this nomadic life, totally dedicated to making art. That takes some serious conviction.
It really does. He funded it through sales and commissions, traveling all over Italy, France, Ireland, Mexico, the South Pacific.
Wow, that must have
Yeah.
been incredibly stimulating for his work.
And apparently it was an extremely prolific period for him. He was just absorbing everything around him, constantly creating.
The world is his studio, essentially. So how did this life, this philosophy, translate into the art itself? What were the core ideas driving him?
Well, a big one was this belief that art should sort of transcend traditional criticism and the market. It should speak directly to the viewer's soul.
Aiming for a deeper connection.
Exactly. Early on, his style leaned towards abstract impressionism, energetic, focused on feeling. But even then, you start seeing hints of his later symbolic language. He never really stood still stylistically.
And then in the 70s, there was that Muches Volantes style he developed with Nancy Giordano. Tell us about that.
Ah, yes. Muches volantes. Literally, flying flies. It involved these intricate patterns of dots and dashes
Okay.
that created optical illusions. But the key thing was, it really demanded viewer participation. Your eye, your brain, had to kind of complete the image.
So it's playing with perception itself, making the viewer an active participant.
Totally. It forces you into this collaborative role, makes you question what you're seeing. It connects to artists like Escher or Dali, who also played with perception.
Sure, the mind-bending stuff.
But Camblin's approach had its own flavor, that direct invitation for you to finish the work in your mind.
Interesting. And did he stick with that?
Not exclusively. The art historian Charlotte Moser noted a shift later on away from that super intricate drawing towards more organic flowing forms.
And Eleanor Freed, another critic, pointed out his fascination with life cycles, metamorphosis.
Which fits perfectly with his travels and observations of nature, doesn't it?
It does. He also started blending drawing and watercolor in new ways.
Yeah, creating these illusionistic multi-layered pieces. There's one called Texas Overview that gets mentioned. It incorporates text, layers, and it's even been compared to the work of William Wiley.
Another artist known for that kind of layered, almost narrative style.
Right. It just shows Camblin's constant experimentation. He refused to be pinned down. And collaboration was huge for him, too.
With Earl Staley and Joe Tate, the holding firm.
Exactly. Their joint projects really challenged the whole idea of the single artistic genius, the focus on the finished object. For them, it was much more about the process, the shared act of creation.
And that ties into him signing works as anonymous sometimes, submerging the ego.
It seems like it, as if he wanted the focus purely on the art, the experience, not on the name attached to it. It raises big questions about the artist's role.
It really does. Even in his later works, like the Big Al series or his Descent from the Cross, they show technical mastery for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
But there's still that invitation to look deeper, right? That symbolic layer is always there.
Always. He never stopped asking questions with his images.
So let's dig into that a bit more. Based on his own words, his writings, what were some of those recurring themes, those core concepts?
Paradox is a big one. He talked about traps that don't trap, structures that don't move.
Things aren't what they seem.
Pretty much. Questioning assumptions. Like you might see a frame in his work, something that looks like it should confine the image,
Right.
but instead it actually focuses your attention, draws you into the layers within. It's not trapping, it's guiding.
That fits with the Mush Volantes too, making you look harder, question first impressions.
Exactly. He also explored impermanence, what he called the absurdity of holding on, which makes sense given his nomadic life.
A personal philosophy reflected in the art.
Seems so. And there's this tension in the work between stillness, peace, and constant movement, constant change.
And he actually said, art is questions disguised as images. It feels key.
It really sums it up. He wasn't providing answers, he was prompting inquiry. It's the interplay between the visual and the philosophical that's crucial.
He was looking for everyday enlightenment, you said.
Yeah, finding beauty in the absurd, humor in decay, embracing the whole spectrum, life and death.
I like that everyday enlightenment. Finding the profound in the ordinary. He wanted to challenge how we see things.
Definitely. Help us see the world differently, maybe with fresh eyes. He saw art as a potential meditation tool.
Like a Zen koan, almost.
Sure.
Something to disrupt logical thinking.
Kind of, yeah. His process involved a lot of self-inquiry, resisting quick answers, staying with ambiguity. He wanted the art to spark wonder, reflection.
And he blended styles freely, abstraction, symbols, old wisdom, modern ideas.
Completely, drawing from all sorts of sources. And those broad themes show up in specific images. The figure four trap motif signifies entanglement, maybe.
Okay.
A tattooed arm could represent unspoken history. A frog might embody a kind of natural, effortless wisdom. Simple images, but layered meanings.
And what about this mystic switch idea he mentioned?
Ah, that's interesting. It seems to be about a gut reaction, a visceral knowing that something is true for you personally. It goes beyond just looking. It's about seeing.
An intuitive understanding.
Right. Achieving that Zen mind in the creative flow. He distinguished magic for seeing, art opening perception from magic for power. His interest was in awareness, not control.
And he seemed very aware of the art world's pressures too. Novelty, disposability. Maybe that's why he sometimes chose anonymity.
That's a really good point. It could be a way to step outside that system, focus on the work's intrinsic value. He was constantly grappling with these big questions about art, creativity, perception.
His writings are full of these little, almost paradoxical nuggets, aren't they?
They are. Power that is no power, work that is not work, stepping off the train of thought. It's about finding a different way to engage with creativity and maybe with life itself.
He also seemed to value common sense, but stayed open to both science and maybe more mystical ways of knowing.
Yeah, he talked about enjoying miracles on both sides, having this perfectly average view but staying open. It suggests a balanced perspective.
And that image,
Yeah.
the gate stays open, the fence is broken, the search for an unknown quarry. That really captures the feeling of constant exploration in his work.
It does. It wasn't about finding final answers, but about the process of seeking, questioning. He preferred evolution over revolution change coming from a deeper organic place.
And the idea of the standard sign? That some knowledge just can't be conveyed. It has to be experienced directly.
Right. It points to an artist deeply aware of the limits and possibilities of communication through art.
But he also had a grounded side. No mistakes, only doing the best you can. That's quite liberating for any creative person.
It is, and avoiding the demon of being right, just staying in the flow, in the present moment.
His description of ego as a goldfish's shit is memorable.
Yes, it certainly paints a picture, a desire to get beyond self-importance.
And the jars of water, turning stumbling blocks into stepping stones, another powerful visual metaphor from him.
It is. Resilience, adaptation. And his scarecrows, inspired by Gunter Grass, symbolizing renewal, metamorphosis, those cyclical themes again.
Even words in his drawings weren't always straightforward, sometimes disguises or clues.
Exactly. Adding another layer of intrigue, making you work a bit as the viewer. His whole body of work feels like this complex puzzle.
Constantly asking us to look beyond the surface. He aimed high too, wanting to remake Goya in 20th century terms.
Which shows his awareness of art history, but his determination to forge his own path. You see that evolution from his early social protest art
Right.
towards combining realism and abstraction. Influences like Cremona, Etruscan figures, they all fed into his unique blend. His time in Italy was clearly pivotal.
Combining the poetic, like Hugo van der Goes, with the emotional power of Goya.
Yeah. The 70s were really rich for exploring those big themes: birth, death, regeneration, drawing on Freud, de Chirico, even Grunewald.
And then in the 80s, those interwoven drawings and watercolors hinting at hidden meanings, revealed through his really sensitive line work.
It's like the art is designed to unfold slowly, revealing more with repeated viewing, leading to a deeper connection.
Which brings us to his elusiveness and his legacy. It's strange to think of thousands of his works out there, but rarely seen publicly.
It is remarkable, scattered in private collections all over the world. And that scarcity, of course, adds to the mystique. When pieces do come up for sale, they can fetch high prices.
But despite being outside the mainstream, his peers respected him, even saw him as an iconoclast.
Definitely. He challenged things. But his later moves, first to Oregon, then Louisiana, meant he lost touch with many of his Houston friends and collaborators.
And that story of him visiting Houston before he died, feeling uncomfortable with the past, it suggests someone always moving forward, maybe.
Perhaps. Always focused on the next exploration, not wanting to be pinned down by what he'd already done.
It's also telling that attempts to organize a major museum show in his lifetime didn't pan out. Maybe his work was just too hard to categorize easily.
Could be. Capturing that diversity and conceptual depth in one show would be a challenge. Even that frame shop show, organized to help him after his stroke, highlights the practical difficulties he faced later on.
Pete Gershon called him a mystical trickster figure. That seems to fit quite well.
It does capture that blend of intellectual playfulness and deep inquiry. George O. Jackson Jr. saw his art as a portal, a kind of book to be read.
And Earl Staley stressed his role as a catalyst, a teacher through collaboration.
Penny Serling remembered his constant questioning, his love of discussion and argument. Carolyn Farb saw his art as deeply autobiographical.
And the Southwestern Historical Quarterly noted that balance he maintained between his art and his personal life. It paints a picture of someone whose life and work were just completely intertwined.
Absolutely. His legacy is really one of unwavering dedication to a unique vision, relentless innovation. He continues to inspire artists today. He defied easy labels, pushed boundaries, and left work that still provokes and rewards close looking.
So, wrapping this up, it's clear Bob Camblin really resists any simple definition, doesn't he? Constantly evolving his style, exploring these deep philosophical questions through work that's visually rich, but often enigmatic.
Yeah, his life itself, that restless curiosity, that deep engagement with the world, it was just inseparable from the art he made.
And we really hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, some insight into this fascinating artist's mind. Maybe sparked some thoughts about art, perception, the search for meaning, themes that really run through Camblin's work.
We hope so.
And finally, maybe a thought to leave you with. Camblin once said, "You never miss the water until the wells run dry." Thinking about his nomadic life, his eventual withdrawal from the Houston scene where he'd found success, what do you think he might have meant by that? In the context of his own journey, what water might he have missed or maybe deliberately left behind?
That's a really interesting question to ponder.
Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.